I'll wrap up with, oh, there we go, with where we're headed, where the field is moving from here. So this is our plan, pretty straightforward. And I'd like to start actually with a story about a man named Viktor Frankl. So Viktor Emil Frankl, he was born on March 26, 1905. He was born on the top floor of his family's home in Vienna, Austria, to parents who were Jewish civil servants. By all accounts, he was known to be a really bright and really inquisitive child. He was supposed to be supposedly very emotional, but at the same time, also deeply rational. Those who knew him well say he had a really terrific sense of humor. And as early as high school, Viktor Frankl took a really serious interest in psychology. And of course, he was living in Austria at the same time as Freud. So, as young as high school, he started a correspondence with Freud. He went on as an adult to become a psychologist. He actually became a professor of neurology and a professor of psychiatry at the University of Vienna. And at the time, the economy in Austria following World War I, it was really a mess. Lots of people were out of work, and the city was actually suffering from a spate of suicides. So a number of high numbers of young people, particularly young men, were dying by suicide. And so Frankel got this idea that he wanted to set up counseling centers around the city of Vienna. And he got some support from the city to do it. And he sat down and he spoke with these young men and really tried to understand what was going on with them. Why was there this terrible outbreak of depression? And one of the things he quickly recognized was that these men were suffering from a lack of purpose because of the really challenging economic situation. Many of them were out of work and they were unable to provide for themselves and for their families in any sort of meaningful way. And like I said, they were really struggling with that lack of purpose. And so this finding really shaped Frankel's understanding of human development. And what he recognized is that leading a life of purpose is absolutely essential to our survival and to our well-being. So he began writing a book about the importance of leading a life of purpose. And to be honest, this book was to go on to become his life's work. At the age of 36, he met and he married the love of his life, Tilly Grosser. Just a few months later, the couple was overjoyed to learn that they were expecting their first child. However, at this point, it was 1941, and the Nazis had invaded Austria. So it wasn't long before the couple was arrested. Tilly was forced to abort their child, and she and Victor were taken off to Auschwitz. The Nazis seized and destroyed the manuscript that Frankel was working on, his book about the importance of leading a life of purpose. And Victor remained in Auschwitz for several months, but Tilly was quickly moved to another concentration camp. She was moved to Bergen-Belsen, where tragically she died at the age of 24. Now, Victor was totally unaware of his wife's fate, and so he spent the next 3 years in 4 different concentration camps. And he really used his time in these camps to study people carefully. And what he saw again was among those people who even had the opportunity to survive, I mean, he acknowledged there was a huge element of luck. But among the people who were even given the chance to survive, those who had a purpose in life were more likely to endure. He recognized that people can withstand an awful lot if they have a reason larger than themselves to keep going. And he noticed later on, he would go on to write about this, where he writes in the non-degenderized language of the day, quote, "A man who becomes conscious of the responsibility he bears toward a human being who affectionately waits for him or to an unfinished work will never be able to throw away his life. He knows the why for his existence and will be able to bear almost any how." So he really recognized what he'd seen in Austria, in Vienna, the importance of leading a life of purpose. He saw that played out in these camps as well. And he actually used it to keep himself going as well. While he was in the concentration camp, he came down with typhoid fever. And to keep himself alert and alive, he began rewriting his manuscript on little scraps of paper that he could find or steal around the camps. And finally, on April 27th, 1945, the final camp that he was in was liberated, and Frankel was freed. Upon being freed from the concentration camp, Frankel was finally able to write and publish his book on purpose. He wrote the book. I find this just absolutely amazing. He wrote the book in 9 days. So he had thought it through so thoroughly while he was, before he was in the camps and while he was in the camps, that he wrote the whole book in 9 days. Man's Search for Meaning was published in Austria in 1946. Since then, the book has been translated into 24 languages. It's sold more than 10 million copies. And here in the US, our Library of Congress identified it as one of the 10 most influential books. So I share Frankel's story with you because his life story and purpose, they've really inspired my own. But also his early work served as a really important catalyst for psychological research on purpose. So Frankel was really the first one to introduce this idea that leading a life of purpose might be really core to human thriving and human well-being. So as you heard at the beginning, as I'm a professor at CGU, I wanted to stick up here the website. This is my website for my research lab. And I'm going to talk a lot about studies that I have conducted. And many of those studies can be found on this website. So if any of the research or any of the tools interest you, feel free to check them out on my website. Okay, so Frankel published his book back in 1946. And right after he did, there was sort of a flurry of research on purpose. Frankel worked with two people, Krumbach and Mahalek, and they conducted a flurry of studies to try to understand and test some of Frankel's early ideas. But then that interest kind of died down, and we really didn't see much psychological interest in studying or understanding this idea of purpose until around the early 2000s. This was when the positive psychology movement was getting underway. My advisor in grad school, William Damon, who was a professor at Stanford, launched one of the very first, or the very first study of youth purpose in the early 2000s. And it was around this time that this research really began to take off. So I was fortunate enough to be involved in one of these really early studies of purpose. And one of the first things that we needed to launch a scientific investigation of this topic was a definition, right? We needed to have a definition, not just, a broad understanding of what it means to lead a life of purpose, but one that we could operationalize in empirical studies on the topic. And so we came up with this definition that I think is important to spell out. I want to note that there are the idea of purpose has been defined in sometimes in inconsistent ways. And so when I'm talking about a purpose, I'm referencing something pretty specific. In 2003, my colleagues and I proposed this definition. A purpose is a far horizon intention to accomplish personally meaningful aims in the broader world. So that's kind of a mouthful. Let me see if I can break that down just a little. There are really three components of this definition that are particularly important to highlight. The first is that a purpose in life, it's a goal of sorts. It's not, a short-term aim or a short-term objective, but instead it's sort of this far horizon aim that you want to work toward. I think it's important to note that a purpose in life, it may be a goal that is never actually fully achievable, but it is a goal towards which you can make progress. So that's the first part of this definition. A purpose in life is a goal of sorts. The second part of the definition that I want to highlight is that it's a really personally meaningful goal. We have lots of goals, but a purpose in life is one that we care deeply about. We care so deeply about it that we identify with it. And we are willing to invest our time and our energy and our personal resources in making progress toward it. So by that, I mean that a purpose in life, it's not something we just sit around and dream about. It's something that inspires us to take action. It's something that actually gets us moving. So that's the second part of the definition. And then the third part is that it is a goal, a very personally meaningful goal that's inspired, at least in part, by a desire to make a difference in the broader world. And so, in this way, a purpose in life isn't just about achieving a personally meaningful goal because of what it does for us, but for how it allows us to contribute to the world beyond ourselves. And this beyond the self dimension is actually really important because a lot of the research suggests that beyond the self motivations, right, this desire to contribute, they deter a lot of the psychological risks associated with self absorption. So, taking this together, we find purpose when we are able to apply our skills and our talents to address really personally meaningful um, issues in the broader world. And based on this definition, our research finds that people today, particularly young people, find purpose in a broad range of intentions. So some people find purpose in creating works of art that change the way that people think. Others find purpose in pursuing careers that enable them to make a personally meaningful difference in the broader world. Others find purpose in following the tenets of their religious beliefs, in supporting social and political change, in volunteering in their communities, in caring for their families. There are really an endless number of ways in which you can find and pursue purpose. And when we talk about purpose, we often talk about a purpose in life, but in reality, it turns out we have multiple purposes. Purpose tend to wax and to wane as the circumstances and the context in our own lives change. So we may, for example, find purpose in caring for our families, but as we launch our adult children, we may reinvest in career-oriented purposes. And that may be all well and fine until we reach retirement age, at which point we may choose to invest in the community. So the idea is that we have more than one purpose, and our purpose can evolve over the course of and the purposes can evolve over the course of our lifespan. All right, so research on purpose has really exploded over the past 20, 25 years once it really got going. In fact, there were fewer than 150 articles published in PsycInfo prior to 2000, so fewer than 150, more than 10,000 since then. So I think that gives you a sense of just how much interest there has been in this topic. So to try to understand how research on purpose has really sort of come together over the years, my colleagues and I conducted what's called a bibliometric study of research conducted on purpose. And so there's lots of different ways of conducting bibliometric studies, but basically we did what's called a co-citation bibliometric analysis. And without getting into the details of all of that, this is like a big data method where you are looking at relationships among published articles. So, you know, if you cite this article, what are the other articles that you tend to cite? And so what it does is it allows you to build sort of a map of the field to get a sense of where the strains of research emerged in this field. And this is our map, which I thought was pretty interesting. What you might notice is that there are 4 clusters, one in red, one in blue, one in yellow, and one in green. And these really are the 4 sort of streams of research that have emerged over these past 20 to 25 years. So if you look at the articles in the blue cluster over in that lower left-hand side, it's really interesting to notice that this is the oldest cluster. These are all the articles that are the very oldest. And a lot of these articles were published either by Viktor Frankl or with, like I said, his collaborators, Crumbaugh and Mahalik. So you'll see their names popping up again and again. So this is a lot of that really early work that Frankl and his colleagues did. And that was kind of one little cluster of research. Next to that, you see maybe a red cluster. And this is research that Carol Riff has conducted. So Carol Riff is a professor at the University of Wisconsin. She does this research on the scales of psychological well-being, of which purpose represents one of 6 indicators of human thriving in her model. And she has conducted a really impactful study called the MIDAS, which is the study of midlife in the US. And so it's this big longitudinal study and generated tons of research. It's looked at purpose and along with other indicators of well-being. And so most of these articles that pop up in this red strand are looking at links between purpose and different indicators of psychological well-being. Now there's a green cluster that you might notice it almost kind of forms around the red one, and that's not by accident. It turns out that this green cluster of studies also is based largely on work that came out of that Midas study, so looking at purpose as an element of psychological well-being. But the green studies tend to focus more on older adults and on physical health issues. So a lot of these appear in medical journals. And so that's so those are often some of the newer articles as well. And then standing a little bit off to the side is this yellow cluster. The yellow cluster is the only cluster that really focuses on youth. So the blue, the red, and the green really looked at purpose among adults, and the yellow really looked more at purpose among youth. So anyway, I just thought it was kind of interesting to see how the strains of this field came together to get us to where we are today. But it also might lead to this question, well, why has there been so much research on purpose? Well, I think in part because the construct really appears to be inextricably intertwined with human thriving. So next, I want to share with you some of what we have learned about the ways in which purpose contributes to and is associated with well-being. So, as I said at the beginning, Frankl was really interested in how purpose supported survival. I mean, he really argued that people cannot survive without a purpose in life. And so he put forth all of these hypotheses about how he expected purpose would be inversely related to things like anxiety and loneliness and depression and isolation, suicide ideation, and suicide behavior. And a lot of research has investigated those links and has supported Frankl's hypotheses. So it's definitely the case that leading a life of purpose does help sort of ward off these negative states, these negative psychological states. And this is obviously very significant. But in conjunction with the growth of the positive psychology field, researchers have become interested in understanding not only how purpose can buffer against these sort of negative psychological states, but how it might also be able to support more positive ones. In short, we really, researchers really wanted to understand, is it the case that purpose might not just help us survive, but might help us thrive? And the answer is a resounding yes. Oops, did we get full feedback? I'm not sure. Oh, okay. That sounds better. So anyway, the idea is that research on purpose finds that compared to individuals who lack a purpose in life, those with a strong purpose tend to report better psychological health. For instance, they report being more hopeful, having more positive affect, and experiencing greater life satisfaction. And given that purpose is so strongly connected to psychological health, researchers also, as I said just prior, got interested in studying links between purpose and physical health. And it turns out, again, that leading a life of purpose is associated with things like a improved cardiovascular functioning, lower levels of chronic pain, and better sleep. Individuals with a purpose in life report fewer sleep disturbances at night, which I always find remarkable. But maybe not as remarkable as research that finds that people with a purpose in life, they actually live longer lives. Purpose I think there's been 4 or 5 studies now that have really convincingly established links between purpose and longevity. Now, some of this research is correlational in nature, so it could be the case that purposeful people are healthier, or it could be the case that healthier people have more purpose, or it could be the case that there's a third variable, say optimism or hope, that contributes to higher rates of both purpose and better health. So a lot of research has been more recently sort of looked into the mechanisms through which purpose may be contributing to positive health outcomes. And a lot of that research it points to different sorts of links or different ways in which purpose is not only correlated, but may actually contribute to these positive health outcomes. So one of the first is, of course, through sleep, right? You know, sleep is associated with all kinds of psychological as well as physical health benefits, and purpose sleep supports sleep. So it may be through sleep that we get some of these benefits. Research has also looked at self-care. You know, how often do you see the doctor? How often do you eat fruits and vegetables? How often do you get enough sleep at night, right? All of these self-care things are higher among individuals with a clear purpose in life than among individuals without a clear purpose. So this ability, you know, this tendency to take good care of our health might be another mechanism through which purpose actually contributes to these health outcomes rather than just correlates with them. There's also been research looking at people at a genetic level. And right, we know from the epigenetics, from the genotype and the phenotype, that the way that we live our lives calls forth a particular genetic expression. And individuals with a purpose in life, it tends to call forth a very healthy sort of genetic response, one that is more resistant to illness and things like that. So all of this research taken together, I think really strongly suggests that purpose is not only correlated with these positive outcomes, but also appears to help contribute to them. And outside of the realm of physical health, people have also looked at links between purpose and academic as well as professional success. And it turns out that purpose is associated with a broad range of indicators of both. So purpose predicts things like grit. Individuals are better able to kind of stick with the tough stuff. Purpose is really strongly connected to resilience or the ability to bounce back from life's challenges. Also to self-efficacy. Individuals with a purpose in life, they feel more efficacious. They feel as though they can have the positive impact they want to have on the broader world. So all of these things are important indicators of both professional as well as academic success. So clearly, leading a life of purpose is a good thing. It's associated with and even appears to contribute to a wide range of positive outcomes. And I think this is one of the reasons we've seen so much research on this topic. I think one of the other things that's interesting to note is that because we find purpose in serving or contributing to the world beyond ourselves, leading a life of purpose is not only good for the individuals who pursue it, but it's also good for the people and the causes and the places that they find purpose in serving and supporting. So I think in positive psychology, we've seen a greater focus on looking not only at individuals, but also at systems. And this is, I think, purpose fits in well here, that it supports not only individual well-being, but also societal well-being, which I always find interesting. So in our field, we tend to frame our research on purpose using what we call a relational developmental systems framework. This is really a meta theory that describes human development as this dynamic process that arises from continuous interactions between an individual and their context, their ever-changing environments. And the frameworks really emphasize that purpose development, it can't be understood in isolation from its context. Like the ability to, or the types of things that you're likely to find purpose in pursuing are shaped by the context that you live in. The likelihood that you are to identify a purpose for your life is also shaped by the context that you live in. So the context shape both the likelihood that individuals will lead lives of purpose, the processes individuals will follow in identifying personally meaningful aims in life, and the content, right? What it is that they find purpose in pursuing. So this framework is really bidirectional. And what it suggests is that our purposes are shaped by our experiences and our experiences are shaped by our purpose. So I think that's an important idea to kind of keep in mind. So at this point, hopefully you're convinced that leading a life of purpose is a good thing. And you might be wondering, well, how common is it, right? Is this something that most people report doing, or is it a rare experience? And it turns out that actually across the lifespan, leading a life of purpose is relatively rare. only about 1 in 3 adults can articulate a purpose for their lives. And I think this is an important point. I really believe, I guess I don't have the research to back this up, but that all people have a purpose in their lives, but many people have really struggled to articulate it, to uncover it, to figure out exactly what it might entail. But anyway, I think this is an important finding as well. At least it was one that really struck us in our lab. Given all of these benefits of leading a life of purpose, to learn that really only 1 in 3 adults, and it's actually lower than that, 1 in 10 early adolescents, 1 in 5 high school age students, and 1 in 3 college students, that manages to lead a life of purpose. So in our lab, this made us immediately start to think about, well, do you think we could encourage the development of purpose, right? Might there be things that we could do to help people cultivate a purpose in their lives? And this really led to our taking a look at this. So our first indication that it might be possible emerged, it might be possible to help cultivate purpose in the lives of young people. That first possibility emerged, I think, as much good science does, completely on accident. So what had happened is we were conducting a study. We had surveyed more than 1,000 young people across the United States and Canada. And the surveys assessed the degree to which young people felt they had a purpose in their lives. We then just randomly selected 100 of those roughly 1,000 young people, and we interviewed them. And in the interviews, we asked them, what matters most to you? What are you trying to accomplish in your life? Why? And we really wanted to understand what kinds of things contributed to their purpose and what kinds of supports, were evident and all of that. And at the end of these interviews, it was really interesting because the young people would say, wow, I said some good stuff in there. Can I get a copy? We were recording the interviews. Can I get a copy of that interview, of that recording? Or can I get a copy of the transcript? And we thought, wow, that's interesting. Usually when you interview young people, they just, are kind of glad to be done and move on. But in this case, they really enjoyed the interview process and they wanted to keep it going. And so that made us kind of wonder, is it possible that this one-time interview was some sort of unintentional intervention? And as luck would have it, as a part of our research design, we had already planned to survey the young people again months later. So we had this group of young people that had randomly been selected to participate in interviews and a group that had not. And we looked at their change in purpose scores from time 1 to time 2. And lo and behold, the young people who were interviewed did show significant increases in their purpose scores months later. So this suggested to us that the interview likely helped to cultivate purpose and that there were things that we could do as researchers, as practitioners to help people really identify their purpose in life. And since then, over the years, we've conducted multiple studies where we've tried to nurture the development of purpose. And I think one of the really, and I should say too, this is research we've conducted in our own lab, but it's also research that others have conducted in other labs as well. This has become a really popular area of inquiry. And I think one of the things that everybody agrees upon is that purposes are really developed rather than discovered. And I think this is an important distinction because when you talk about, find your purpose, it makes people think like, oh, if I just pick up the right rock, right, it's going to be sitting under there. And that's not really the way it works. Instead, a purpose comes from within. And often it follows this sort of intentional effort to reflect on the things that matter most. It requires trying new activities, reflecting on those experiences, and trying again. So it's more this cultivation process, trial, error, reflection, trial, error, reflection. And that's really the way that most people figure out what it is that gives their lives purpose. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to create some interventions, right? And before we got started on that, we thought, well, when in the lifespan is the right time to intervene? Purpose researchers generally agree that children really lack the cognitive capacity to lead full lives of purpose. They're not quite ready to engage in the hypothetical deductive reasoning or the abstract thinking that purposeful planning often requires. However, from about adolescence onward, people are cognitively equipped to search for and pursue purpose. So we wondered, when in the lifespan might we intervene? High school, college, midlife, later adulthood? And for a variety of reasons, we thought adolescence and young adulthood might be a really developmentally appropriate time to launch conversations about purpose, to launch these kinds of interventions. So, one of the primary reasons that adolescence and young adulthood is a really useful time to start this work is that this is the time that young people are engaged in the search for identity. Who am I and who do I want to become? And at the same time that young people are exploring these identity related questions, many are often also exploring these purpose related questions, which are, what do I want to accomplish with my life? How do I want to leave my mark? In fact, the answers to these two sets of questions are often inextricably intertwined. So, what I want to accomplish in my life largely reflects who I am or who I want to become. So, given the really intertwined nature of purpose formation and identity development, we and others have often targeted many of our purpose cultivation efforts on adolescents and young adults. And there we go. So now I'd like to tell you just a little bit about some of the purpose cultivation studies that we've conducted in our lab. And I'm certainly not going to review all of the research on the purpose interventions. We don't have enough time for that. But I thought I'd share just a smattering of the studies that we have conducted to give you a flavor of some of the interventions that have been developed and tested and found to be effective. So here are just a quick overview, and then I'm going to go into a little more. One is an online purpose reflection. One is inducing a grateful mindset. And the last one is volunteer work. So let me say a little bit about each of those. So the first one here is this online purpose cultivation toolkit. So given that the interview we administered, that it worked so well to help cultivate purpose, one of the first things we tried to do in our efforts to cultivate purpose was to really take that interview and turn it into a set of online tools that young people could engage with to hopefully cultivate purpose. And so we created these online activities designed to encourage young people to reflect on the things that mattered most to them and to really consider why these things mattered so much to them. So participants did like a pre-test. They did these 3 online activities. They each took place on a different day, lasted maybe 15 to 20 minutes each. And then they took a post-test and a lagged post-test. And so let me just give you an example of one of the online activities. So in the US, Jimmy Fallon is a very popular late night talk show host. This is his picture here. I don't know if do you have Jimmy Fallon in India? I'm not sure. But he's pretty popular here with young people as well as with adults. And what happened is he had this little YouTube video. It's like 3 minutes long. And he tells this story. You can see his finger here is bandaged. He fell and he had a really badly broke 2 fingers. And he landed in the hospital and he had to have surgery. And while he was waiting to have surgery, he tells this story about how somebody brought him Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. So again, in this very brief video, he says, so I read the book and I figured out what is my purpose in life. And he said, my purpose in life is to make people smile, right? He's a comedian. He's a pretty famous, well-known comedian. And he said, being here in the hospital, I see doctors and nurses and everybody will just stop by. And when they see me, they just start to smile. And he said, I realized that just being a comedian, I can bring a lot of joy to people. And that is my purpose in life. So as a part of this activity, the people would watch this 3-minute video of Jimmy Fallon about his purpose in life, and then write about what does this make them think about their own purpose in life. And we found this to be a particularly useful video because His purpose in life is not so grand, right? He's not out there doing something great and super unattainable. He's making people smile. And I think this idea felt really accessible to a lot of the young people in our study. So this was just one of 6 different activities that they would complete over the course of the week. And we had a purpose condition and a control condition, and we did find that these purposeful activities significantly increased rates of purpose from time 1 to time 2, and that increase was maintained over the lagged period. So that's one approach we have taken to cultivating purpose is these online activities that focus on helping young people reflect on the things that matter most to them. Another one is through cultivating gratitude. So this might seem a little counterintuitive, but I've actually conducted hundreds of interviews with young people who talk about their purpose in life, and they tell me about how experiences of gratitude have often inspired their purpose. So, when you feel really grateful, when you're really focused on the blessings in your life and on the people who have blessed you, you tend to feel sort of naturally inclined to pay it back or to pay it forward. And that can take the form of a purpose in life. So we created a whole nother intervention that only focused on gratitude. We just cultivated grateful states. We had people do things like reflect on 3 good things that they were grateful for each day and write a gratitude letter to someone they really care about and are grateful to. And we looked at purpose. So none of the interventions had anything to do with purpose. They only had to do with gratitude, but we tested them on purpose. And it turned out this gratitude intervention also significantly led to significant increases in rates of purpose. And in fact, the interesting thing was this intervention was actually slightly more effective than the one that focused more directly on purpose. And we think the reason is that it was a very unintimidating way to broach this topic of purpose. It can be kind of scary as a young person to be asked, what do you want to accomplish in your life? But it's a lot easier to reflect on the blessings in your life and the people who you're grateful for. So that's sort of a second way in which we have looked at cultivating purpose. The third approach has often focused on encouraging contribution. So we can do this. This is research that we have tried in our own lab, but many others have found the same thing. Whether it's through service learning or volunteer work, getting young people out into the world and helping them contribute in ways that matter to them. So basically trying out potential purposes in life. This definitely cultivates purpose. Service activities can help young adults focus on the world beyond themselves and to really see the needs of the broader world and start to think about how they can contribute and how they can make a difference. And contribution, right, giving back to the broader world is really at the heart of purpose. So it turns out there are 2 caveats here. These service learning volunteer kinds of experiences are only likely to cultivate purpose when 1, the young person has some say in the kind of activity that they do. Because if you require somebody to do something that isn't particularly meaningful to them, it's probably not going to inspire purpose. They need to have some say in what the activity is. The second thing is that for these service learning activities to become really catalysts for the development of purpose, you need to encourage young people to reflect on their experiences. How did it feel? What difference did they make? What mattered to them as they went through this? So that reflection is really key. Okay, so again, lots of studies that we have done trying to cultivate purpose. I just tried to give you sort of a flavor, some online activities that looked at purpose directly, activities that focused on gratitude, a whole other body of research looking at service and volunteer work. And I think that if you look across all of the different research studies that have been conducted where they have tried to cultivate or nurture the development of purpose, there are certain principles that really jump out at you. So I wanted to sort of highlight those principles here. Purpose is nurtured by activities and opportunities that encourage far horizon thinking. Right? A lot of times we don't ask young people, what is it that you really want to accomplish in your life? Right? We tend to focus more on short-term thinking. So activities that really encourage this far horizon thinking are core to cultivating purpose. Activities that nurture a beyond the self orientation. So activities that help young people think about how they might want to contribute, how they, what are the issues in the broader world that matter to them. Those are the kinds of activities that are likely to cultivate purpose. Activities that support reflection on the things that matter most. This idea of reflecting on and really trying to understand what matters most is absolutely core to the development of purpose. And again, if you look across all the activities, they do that in different ways. Activities need to really respect youth's autonomy. So young people need to feel as though, I think one of the reasons the interview was so effective is that as interviewees, we really didn't have any bias. We weren't pushing young people to have a particular purpose in life. And one of the things they've told us is that it's really important that they have autonomy to determine what it is that matters most to them and that they don't feel as though they're being shoved in a particular direction. And then next, research that really considers the context in which the purpose cultivation activity is likely to take place. So as we said, the context really matters. And that's why I like to highlight these general principles. If you're interested in helping somebody figure out what might be their purpose in life, you want to think about the context and design activities that do these things, but are also appropriate for that context. Mm-hmm. Okay, so at this point, I've talked to you about what purpose is, where we are, and just really briefly, I want to highlight a few areas of where I think we're headed. I want to make sure to wrap up here in time for some questions, so this part will be quick. 3 areas that I think are really ripe for future research, and I have them listed here one at a time. The definitional work. One of the problems in positive psychology more generally is this jingle jangle issue where we have the same term referring to 2 different ideas or to multiple different ideas, different terms referring to the same idea. This is a problem that is really consistent across a lot of research in positive psychology. And unfortunately, it is a problem with the research on purpose as well. So we have more than one way of defining purpose, and there's a lot of interest in trying to disentangle this. So that William Damon wrote an article in the General Review of Psychology just a month before last, where he was calling for using slightly different terminology to refer to the different ways in which you are defining the construct. But I think this is an area of research that really does require some additional attention. One of the other areas of research that I think is needed is more of a global perspective. So in that bibliometric study, we found that fully 90% of the foundational articles written about purpose were written by scholars in the US and Europe, so in the West, in highly educated and democratic and contexts that are not representative of the rest of the world. And given that we know that context shapes purpose, we really need more research from other parts of the world to better understand what purpose looks like in different cultural contexts. So I think that's another area that is really ripe for future work. And then lastly, I think just broader applications. So leading a life of purpose makes such a difference for the people involved. And I feel like we've really just begun to scratch the surface of what it means to lead a life of purpose in school or at work or in healthcare settings and or religious settings. I think there's a lot of research and a lot of interest in doing this research to better understand how we can take what we have learned empirically and apply it in these different contexts. All right, so I do want to wrap up, so I leave time for questions. So I want to end where I began, which is with Viktor Frankl. I love this quote. He says, "One should not search for an abstract meaning in life. Everyone has his own specific vocation or mission in life to carry out a concrete assignment which demands fulfillment. Therein, he cannot be replaced, nor can his life be repeated. Thus, everyone's task is as unique as his specific opportunity to implement it." So with that, I wish you all the best as you pursue your purpose in life. And I just want to say thank you. And thank you to the members of my lab who helped me conduct this research. And thank you to you for your time and your attention. And I do think I have some time for questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Kendall, for such an enlightening session. And um, well, we do have some questions in the chat. Maybe we can start with this one. Um, don't you think the goals are real life planning and execution that fulfills the abstract and broader notion of purpose?
So let's say I'm looking up, don't say it one more time. Don't you think the
Goals are real life planning and execution which fulfill the abstract and broader notion of purpose?
Yeah, so like I said, when we define purpose, we define it in a pretty specific way. We think about goals not just to live our lives, but to contribute to the broader world. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about purpose. And the interesting thing is, we've done a lot of research with lay people, asking them, what does it mean to you to lead a life of purpose? And our conceptualization of purpose really aligns with the way that most people think about it. So when most people think about what is their purpose in life, they think about, how do I want to leave my mark? How do I want to contribute? How do I want to make a difference?
Okay. Then we have another one. How does the evolving sense of identity across life stages influence the formation of life's purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, as I said, the identity formation is really tied up with purpose development. And so, as identity, I think that we think of the adolescent and increasingly the young adult life stage as really where identity development gets underway, kind of in earnest, and that's why we were interested in studying purpose during those stages of life. But of course, yeah, your identity evolves over the course of your lifespan, just as your purpose does. And as your identity shifts, one of my students is actually looking at this right now. They're looking at turning points, right? And life transitions. And as you undergo these transitions in terms of your own identity development, how does that shape your evolving sense of purpose? So, yeah, I think that's a great question. And there's a lot of research to suggest that the two often do evolve in tandem, and shape one another along the way.
All right, Ayla I think you have answered the questions beautifully, and I'm sorry I have not taken the names of the people who are asking these questions. So if you want to continue, maybe we can take it up. But first, we have a question by Ayla. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kendall. This is so great. Quick question. When I think of the words identity and gratitude, the association or antidote of those things is often guilt. Like I often hear things like guilt is on the other side of gratitude practice. Guilt can really stunt identity formation. Guilt is also often tied with religious expression, which can catapult or catalyze purpose. I'm just curious to hear you talk for 2 minutes on where guilt enters into these frameworks around purpose.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Guilt has been pretty widely recognized as an important moral emotion, right? We feel guilty when we don't do the things that we're supposed to be doing. And I think you're right that in gratitude in particular, when you really focus on what are all the things that people have done for me? Gosh, I really do feel this need to go out and sort of alleviate some of these feelings of guilt by paying it back, or like I said, paying it forward. So I don't think that, so I think guilt is, like I said, it's one of those moral emotions that is often responsible for triggering some positive reactions. That's certainly not the only path to the development of purpose, but I think you're onto something there. Yeah, I think it is one that it can play a role for sure.
Professor Geeta.
Hello, hi. Thanks for this wonderful session. I have a question actually. When you were showing that a map of the world, showing the research conducted on this topic, I just observed that there is a missing part with in relation to the Asian countries where
Totally.
their philosophy is actually connected with asking the first question, that what is the purpose of your life. So
Mhm.
the whole lot of spirituality angle, religion angle, as well as the cultural angle is there, where let's say Asian countries, South Asian countries, including India, where they start relating the meaning of life with asking this question to the student. So I just wanted to know two things first. First one is that is your research is touching any part of that? And secondly, what is there any particular reason why India and Asian countries are not being reflected on that map? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great. Thank you for the question. So by all means, there's very rich traditions of philosophy and, and purpose in all these different cultural contexts. Remember, the map only reflected the psychological research. So there is a decent body of psychological research in Japan on Ikigai. There have been a good number of studies there. I know we designed a measure of purpose and it's been translated and applied in Indonesia, in China, in Taiwan. I don't know if it's been applied in India. I'll have to go look to see. But remember, all that is looking at is where is the psychological research that was conducted between 2000 and 2023. And between 2000 and 2023, there wasn't a strong interest in conducting psychological research on purpose in those contexts. But I 110% agree. We know that people around the world lead lives of purpose. And that's why I was trying to emphasize the need for more psychological research, because I actually think probably some of the research findings that I shared with you today would look different in India. Right? That's why I shared that relational developmental systems framework, which suggests that human development is shaped by contextual context, by cultural context. And so, what we need are researchers in India and other Asian cultures to get excited about studying purpose and to teach us, what does purpose look like in your country? What does, in your cultural context? How does it take shape? How does it evolve over the course of the lifespan? Because I totally agree, it's definitely there. It's probably and it probably looks different. We just haven't had the same sort of psychological interest in studying the construct, and that's why I identified this as one of the areas for future inquiry. So thank you so much. Maybe you'll be someone who will do some of this research.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
I would love to learn
So,
from
yeah,
you. Yeah.
thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, thank
Yeah,
you
but
for reminding us that the purpose of life is a life of purpose. My question is purpose created, evolved, or discovered?
Good. Yeah, we like to say purpose is really developed rather than discovered or cultivated. And I think there are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, that seems to reflect most people's experiences. It's very rare that someone wakes up one day, they have no idea what their purpose in life is, and one thing happens and it all falls into place. Certainly, that's a possibility, but that doesn't seem to be the norm. When we talk to people about their purpose in life, they really talk about sort of a process of trying things out. I have a daughter who's in college right now, and I think she's trying to figure out her purpose. And so, right, she's really involved and she's trying out internships and job shadows and reflecting on, what did I like about this? What didn't I like about this? Would this be meaningful work for me? And in what ways might it be? In what ways might it not? And so, what we really see is that for most people, the development of purpose is this process of trial and error and reflection and trial and error and reflection. And slowly over time, people start to realize, like, you know what? This is actually pretty good. I think I'm at a place where this work is meaningful to me and I do care about it. But the interesting thing is that process never ends. We've never interviewed anybody who was like, I got it all figured out. I'm not even thinking about it anymore. Right? This idea of sort of searching and reflecting and trying, it goes on even after people report, yes, my life has a clear purpose. They are continuing to think though about, What other areas of my life might I be able to, find purpose in? And what other activities within this particular, domain of purposeful engagement might I be able to engage in? So it's a constant process that really extends across the lifespan of sort of committing to a purpose and that purpose evolving and recommitting and evolving and recommitting. And that's why we think about purpose as being developed rather than discovered in one particular moment. Great question.
Thank you. Thank you for answering my question so well.
Hello.
Grateful to
Happy
Hello,
to.
Professor
Rachna.
Kendall.
Hello.
Yeah, hello. So, my quick question is, I am working in the area of flourishing at workplace. So, basically, what I have researched till now is related to how employees think and perceive flourishing at workplace. So, when I used to interview people, so they do not talk specifically about purpose, what their purpose at workplace looks like, but they talks about various goals that they have rather than the purpose, like which evolved from the financial security to the contribution to the broader notion, like we talked about in a purpose as well. So, do you think that this from moving from extrinsic to intrinsic kind of goals is what in real life thing is, uh, which is different from what we generally talk about as a purpose, which is very broad, like abstract thing. Uh,
So you're thinking about the role of goals. I mean, I think the important thing to keep in mind is that as we conceptualize purpose, having a goal orientation is a part of it, but purpose isn't the exact same thing as a goal, right? I might have the goal of I need to find a parking spot in town, and certainly that's not a purpose in our life. So it has to be a very particular kind of goal, a goal that is sort of far horizon, like I want to contribute to the lives of my students by helping to really direct their careers in directions that are, meaningful to them, that enable them to contribute to the science, this kind of thing. And they need to be goals that are also very personally meaningful and that are personally meaningful, at least in part, because they enable people to contribute to the broader world. So not all goals are necessarily purposes in life. You also talked about extrinsic versus intrinsic, and absolutely, purposes come from within. They're very much intrinsically motivated. So that's a key dimension of purpose as well.
Okay, so adding to it, one thing. So most of the participants what I interviewed, they said that they are more interested in their personal development, skill development at the workplace. Do you think it's also a part of purpose because they are intrinsically motivated to develop themselves and do better at workplace?
So again, it depends. Like I always say that almost anything can be a purpose in life. It's really the why, right? So if, gosh, they did a really interesting study with doctors. And you might think, oh, well, every doctor must find purpose in their work, right? They become medical doctors because they want to care for people. Sometimes.
Good morning,
So if
everyone.
you interview
Let's begin
doctors,
another 2 minutes, just waiting for a few more participants.
sorry, you might find that what they found is some doctors would say, you'd say, why did you want to become a doctor? And they might say, well, I could really care for my patients. I could make their lives easier. I can alleviate their pain, right? That's the why. It's because they want to contribute to the world beyond themselves in a way that's really personally meaningful. But then and for them, being a doctor was really a purpose. But then you would interview other doctors and they'd say, why do I want to be a doctor? Well, it's a really highly regarded profession. Everybody thinks I make a lot of money and people look up to me and it's all about me, me, me. And for them, it's not really a source of purpose. So I think that if you're trying to decide what is the purpose, you want to ask why. And if the why, the answer to the why is because it enables me to contribute to the broader world in a personally meaningful way, then it is a purpose. And if it's not, then it's not. So it really depends. You can't look at a particular activity and say that's purposeful or not, because it's really how the individual orients to that activity. Do they approach it as an opportunity to contribute to the broader world, or do they approach it as an opportunity to only focus on self-enhancement? Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Kendall. It was wonderful session.
Oh, thank you. I see one more hand. I'm happy to answer your question.
Good morning, Dr. Kendall, and good evening, good morning to everyone present here. Firstly, thank you very much for this very insightful session. And Viktor Frankl has been a person whose work has really impacted my understanding of positive psychology. My question is towards genuine happiness. So here we are talking about purpose and how purpose can be cultivated. But my question is, so if we become fixated or completely dedicated to finding our purpose and moving towards it, how does that impact our overall sense of well-being and happiness?
Good.
As we understand, yeah, rather than, because as human beings, we have the tendency to be attached.
Yeah. So what we find is that purpose is really strongly correlated with life satisfaction. So I think that what we find is the pursuit of purpose, not every moment of it is a bowl full of cherries, right? Like there are moments where working towards something that really matters to you can be difficult. You might find purpose in parenting. I know I do. And as a parent, not every moment makes me over the moon with happiness. However, there is a deep and enduring sense of satisfaction and contentment, knowing that I'm doing something that really matters to me, that I'm investing my time and energy in ways that I care deeply about. And so I think when we're thinking about the relationship between happiness and purpose, it's important to keep in mind that purpose is not synonymous with happiness. It's not the case that every moment of purposeful engagement is just, fun. However, it is the case that purpose is very strongly, very consistently related to this sort of deep and enduring sense of contentment and satisfaction with one's life. And I think that's where we see a lot of these physical health findings, right? This deep sense that I'm engaged in the right way. I'm dedicating my time and energy as I'm meant to. So I hope that helps. It is not the same thing as happiness. You're right. It is different. And there are moments where being purposefully engaged can be temporarily stressful. However, over the long haul, it tends to be a very satisfying way to approach one's life. So yeah, what a great question that is. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Kendall, for taking all the questions. Can I ask one last question, please?
Sure.
I really enjoyed your session, and what I felt was that is there any way that personality moderates the development of a purpose? Because I have heard of a story of a janitor in NASA who said that I help people explore the extraterrestrial, while there are, very well-placed executives who are devoid of any purpose in their lives. So, does a personality play a role in cultivating our purpose?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think increasingly personality psychologists are recognizing the importance of context. And so, just as context shapes who we are, right? Personality is not fixed and unchanging, but is constantly evolving in reaction to our context. And so, too, I think, is purpose. So, I also think, though, like you said, there are people from all different walks of life that lead lives of purpose. Sometimes when I give this talk, people will say, well, this is great for, college educated young people, but what about young people from really challenging circumstances? And it turns out people from very challenging circumstances absolutely lead lives of purpose. At least they can. It seems to be the kind of experience that is just really core to the human experience, and something that is all people have the potential to lead lives of purpose. So I don't think there's any personality type that for whom purpose is impossible or more likely. I don't think there are circumstances where purpose is impossible. I think it really is the case that purpose is available to all. Yeah, thank you for the question.
But I think, people who come from challenging circumstances, their purpose is to survive. Survival itself is a purpose. Just like Viktor Franklin, because he's a Holocaust survivor, his purpose was to survive in the short run and revive in the long run or grow in the long run.
Yeah, we've done a lot of research in Africa with street children, and we find such inspiring purpose. They often are no longer living with families. They are getting by in groups of young, of adolescents, and they feel a strong, strong commitment to supporting the survival, not only their own survival, but also of their close friends who are like family to them. And they say to us, I can't survive without contributing to my peers, because they are in that is how I will survive, is by serving, so if I get food, if I get anything, I need to share it, because that ensures my own survival. It ensures they will share it with me. So we have seen purpose we did research in Liberia, which is one of the 10 poorest countries in the world, and we interviewed young people living on the streets, and we definitely saw absolutely inspiring tales of purpose. And in fact, a lot of times the challenges that really confront people, those are the very challenges that inspire purpose, right? Like we have a lot of social inequality in the US. And people often talk about, confronting inequality as a source of purpose, right? So if they are feeling poorly treated because of, their ethnic background or socioeconomic background, a lot of people will say they will find purpose in working hard to improve those circumstances for others. And I think Frankel really said, it's when you're in really challenging circumstances that purpose becomes not only a nice to have, but is absolutely essential to human survival.
Hello. May I ask one last question, please?
Sure.
Yeah. A very enlightening session. Thank you, Dr. Bronk. My question is, like, human wants are endless. Once we accomplish one, the another stands up. How to find out that this is the exact purpose I wanted to live for? For example, I have completed my one task I have assigned to myself, and once it is completed or accomplished, my another want stands up. And now I move on to that particular thing. How to find out that this was the thing I was looking for, or the other thing was the thing for which I was looking for. And this cycle goes on continuously. So how to find it out, like which is the exact purpose I am here for, and how to find it out? Please guide me.
Yeah. Well, as I said, definitely check out some of the tools on our website, because we have a lot of tools that people can use to help uncover their own purpose in life. Keep in mind that when we think about what a purpose is, it's generally this sort of far horizon aim that can never be fully accomplished, right? I personally find a lot of purpose in my job. I love being a professor and getting to contribute to this broad area of positive psychology, right? I love conducting research and feeling like I'm adding my small part to this larger field. I'll never be done. I mean, there's never a point at which, like, that's it, we figured it out, we can move on to the next topic. It's always going to be going. I also find a lot of purpose in parenting and helping to raise children who I hope will be, good, productive members of society. That's never going to be fully done. So I think a lot of times when we think about, if we're thinking about a really finite task, that might be a task rather than the actual purpose. The purpose is probably the broader aim. I mean, I think that it's usually something like, contributing to, helping others, or eradicating, social and political problems. And, I mean, there's so many different, but they're generally big issues that we will never fully accomplish, but we can make progress toward.
Thank you, Professor Kendall, for answering all the questions with such patience and keeping the energy levels high, right from the first Viktor Frankl story to the Jimmy Fallon example. I think it has been a remarkable session and we all have deeply enjoyed it. But before we conclude, I would like Professor Priyamvada Mathur, who is a faculty at one of our Reiki centers in Delhi, IGDTUW. I would like her to extend a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ria. Thank you, Ria, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Kendall, for giving an insightful session on purpose. Actually, I think this particular session itself has given us a lot of purposes to work on, right? I really like the way you have covered the purpose from all angles, from antecedents to precedents. So basically, we are talking about what helps us develop a purpose, and I think that itself is a great insight that we will be taking back with us, that it is not so, like you said, find your purpose is not the right way of looking at purpose as a whole, as a factor, right? We should talk about developing it, and the timing of adolescents and young adults. I think that's where, because uh, a lot of time we ask young people, so what are you going to do in your life? And they're like I don't know. And then we're like, oh, you're clueless, you need to know, but we don't know how to help them know. So those interventions, that toolkit that you said, I think but I will go back and go through it. I think that's a beautiful way of, helping people understand why they are here. And I think a lot of us are now looking at the purpose itself in a new angle. So how do we talk about it? How do we include, and how do we cultivate or develop a purpose in ourselves? And one thing that I would really want to say it is like, I think other than what physical manifestations and the mental manifestations that you talked about in the earlier part of the session, I think purpose also gives us a passion. And I think passion is something which you can see in the glowing skin of your face, with the spark in your eyes, the way you talk about purpose itself. So, ma'am, really, this was a very, very, not just an insightful, but a very encouraging, motivational speech for all of us. And as researchers, we all would really would love to, take this, and especially like you said, in the context of India or Asian cultures, where we have a lot of scriptures talking about purpose in a different way. So just adding my little bit understanding at the end. So I think purpose is something like a direction in the long term. So like you were trying to say, it is not a goal, it is not a task that you will finish and then you go on to the next one. But it is a direction which will help you pick up the next goal maybe in your life. So yeah,
That's
ma'am,
great.
thank you so much, ma'am, for this insightful session. And I am really glad that all of us participants were so part of it, that we had so many questions. I'm pretty sure if given the option, we will keep you for the night. But ma'am, thank you so much for your insightful session. And I hope that we will keep this connect and we'll keep coming back to you with a lot of more questions and future research part, ma'am. Thank you for the wholesome session on the purpose. And I really thank everyone, especially Dr. Donaldson at the Claremont, for organizing these sessions, for structuring these sessions for our uh, you know our education, and firstly and lastly, Dr. Reiki, for joining us all together, bringing us all together to this platform. Thank you, everyone, for the session, and thank you, Dr. Bronk, for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you all and your fantastic questions. So, yes, you got an opportunity to do lots of great research. I would love to learn from you about what it means to lead a life of purpose in India. So I'll stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Ria.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, doctor. Thank you, Dr.